Hello there, my name is Stewart Hotston. I'm an author like everybody else on here. My last book was Tangle's Game, published by Rebellion, out last year. Today I'm going to read to you a short story that I wrote. My background is trained physicist, and something that winds me up is how we misunderstand what many worlds theory is, both in fiction but just generally. So this story is, in theory, consistent with our mathematical understanding of many worlds' interpretation of quantum mechanics, but it's not that complicated, so hopefully you will enjoy. And the story is called I Looked Behind the Mirror and All I Saw Was Me. He lugged the sack up the hill one step at a time. He'd make it about 20 steps before needing to stop and wipe the sweat from his palms and his forehead. The suns were setting and night got cold on this variant of Earth. Cold enough he'd leave the hall and re-emerge from his shelter 31 hours from now at sunrise. Birds, or this Earth's version of them, chattered all around. His feet crunched on the bones of the primates who'd inhabited the city before whatever extinction event had ended their society. Close enough that apes were the dominant species, but they were a different shape and size, more like bonobos than humans. Rahul didn't care what had finished them off. He left that to his boyfriend to worry about. Although Galen didn't ever really worry about it, he spent most of his time lost in the narrow focus whose expression resembled an unhappy scowl rather than the actual academic bliss Rahul knew he was feeling. With a huff and a hand across his brow, Rahul got the last of his sacks up to the top of the hill. The gash in the air which represented his way home filled the surrounding space with a sound like tearing cloth. He turned, gazed down on the red light bathing the ruined city in the valley below. That'll do, he said to the air. He pulled at the sacks, sending each one across the barrier on the conveyor belt he'd set up. He wondered where Galen was. He'd been talking about a city a couple of thousand miles south, where the inhabitants seemed to have had trifold symmetry rather than bifold. Another big difference with home, interspecies cooperation. Rahul couldn't picture it, and Galen had promised to show him some pictures when they got home. Rahul! Hearing his name stopped him in his tracks. Who's there? He called. I don't have any weapons, he thought. The city was a ruin, and the local fauna were missing as well. No one knew if the inhabitants had done it, or if they'd been killed in whatever event did for the city, but the outcome was the same. He'd gotten used to feeling safe. It's me, said the voice, and from the tree line 100 metres down the ridgeway stepped a man. Rahul didn't know who he was speaking to and backed away even as the other man came closer. When he was near enough to see properly, Rahul thought his eyes had abandoned all good sense. I know what this looks like, Rahul, but it's true. Rahul was standing in front of Rahul. They were almost identically dressed, except Rahul the newcomer was wearing white socks instead of the blue ones Rahul had put on that morning. I'm going to find something to call him, he thought. The newcomer tried shaking his hand, but Rahul pulled his arms in tight to his side. Stay there. Sorry, said the new Rahul. I've been thinking about this for a while. Why don't you call me Ralph? You know, he said. Rahul was able to finish his sentence. Because it's Rahul and Alpha mashed together. So you'll be calling me Bahul? The new Rahul laughed. Yes, I knew it. Rahul wanted to jump through the portal and close it up behind him. As if reading his intention, Ralph held out a hand as though he were trying to calm an excitable horse. Look, you could jump through there. I know I would think about it. But what you really want to do is know what I'm doing here. How I'm doing here. Rahul wasn't totally convinced. Behind Ralph he could see more movement in the trees. Who's there? He half called out, undecided if he was talking to Ralph or shouting at whoever was hiding in the shade. They'll come out in a minute, Bahul, said Ralph soothingly. Why don't they come out now? Said Rahul. You're not ready, his doppelganger said. Rahul focused on Ralph. Talk to me then. Convince me not just to jump through here and zip it up behind me. First, said Ralph, I'm going to make a list just like you would. His uncanny ability to do exactly what Rahul would have done was not comforting. You'll understand why in a minute, said Ralph. First, then. Like me, you've jumped across from Earth to this place. I don't have a name for it. I suspect you don't either. The people who made it possible have given it some alphanumeric designation, but given the infinite numbers of worlds they're accessing with their algorithms, it seems a bit pointless having proper names, right? So far, so identical. Second, everyone's been wondering where everyone else is. You've stumbled across empty space where the Earth should be, other weird worlds like this one. places where no life even ever evolved. But, like with the absence of time travellers throughout history, no one can answer the basic question. Which is, asked Rahul, his eyes narrowed, knowing what was coming but still feeling the need in his gut to ask anyway. Where is everyone? If there are infinite worlds, then there should be an infinite number of worlds where people have just discovered how to travel between worlds up and down the probability amplitude. This is where we differ, said Rahul, feeling some sense of the real world arriving and suddenly finding his doppelganger was not completely identical to him. I'm sure, smirked Ralph, as if he knew what Rahul was going to say. But you're wrong. Infinity doesn't work like that, and they're the proof. He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder. There's no reason anyone else has discovered the tech, Rahul said, feeling he was wrong, but not knowing why, an empty chasm at his feet into which he could feel himself stepping. Ralph whistled, and from the tree line came a trickle, and then a crowd, and then a flood of other people. At first, Rahul couldn't quite pass what he was seeing. It was like a glitch in a computer game. Hundreds of the same character appearing all at once, walking the same, all coming towards them. Rahul, said Ralph, meet yourself, at least those of us we've been able to save. What the fuck, said Rahul. I know, right, said Ralph. It's a complete headfuck. They stood side by side watching the approaching Rahuls. You know how I ended up being the one to talk to you? We tossed a coin. People chose heads or tails, and the losers were eliminated and whittled down until I was the winner. Like at some charity function where everybody puts in 20 quid. Ralph held up his hands to stop them coming closer. There was grumbling and some shoving as people tried to see more clearly, but the crowd did stop advancing. What do you want? Asked Rahul. We want to make you an offer and save the world. Probably the latter first. And we're pretty much all dying for a burger from that place near you. T-Bone, you know the one. They do that halloumi deep fried in the oil they use to cook the chicken and have the little pot of hot sour sauce on the side. There's not one of us who's not desperate for a portion of that. Home was a converted basement parking lot of the corporation for which Rahul worked. When he first emerged back into the car park, his supervisor, a middle-aged woman called Annie, checked her watch and frowned. I know you filled the first lot of containers, Rahul, but you're not due back for another 2 days. You know you don't need to get the containers yourself. We send them over. She sighed. It'll come off your timesheet either way. The words tumbled out of her mouth, but he wasn't listening. Once he'd made sure the immediate area around the portal was clear, he jumped back through and told everyone to come across one at a time. Ralph told him there were 358 versions of him in the trees. Rahul returned to Earth, earning a shake of the head from Annie. Ralph came through next, but Annie didn't immediately look over. It was only when the ninth Rahul stepped onto Earth that she stopped flicking through the manifest she was checking and saw them congregating around the portal. Rahul had been watching her, waiting with a wince on his face for her gasp of surprise. What the hell are you doing? She said. This is a private portal. If you want to travel... Her voice trailed off as she looked from Ralph to Rahul to the others, even as more Rahuls continued to emerge from the portal. What the fuck? She said, jaws slack and eyes wide. Rahul didn't have anything good to say. Instead, he counted them off, looking for anything to tell them apart. It was fine calling Rahul number 2 Ralph, but how would they figure out what to call 300 identical people, all of whom answered to the same name? How can this be real? He kept asking. The Rahuls looked at him with gratitude, carefully examining him in the same way each time. The same nod of the head he greeted friends. The same line between his eyebrows when he wasn't sure if the person helping him really wanted to. Annie grabbed him by the arm. What have you done? He shrugged, pulling free. It's not me, he said. They came out of nowhere by the portal. They knew where I was. Of course we did, said half a dozen of them in unison. We're you. You're not, said Annie, but Rahul knew she was wrong. Ralph, at least he thought it was Ralph, came and stood next to them. He introduced himself to Annie. Hi, Annie, how's Chad? He's back from college now, but did he sign himself up for the off-world expedition he's so keen on? Annie opened her mouth, then closed it again. What do you want? Ralph smiled. Rahul recognised it as the smile he used when he had something other in mind. I need some time with Johnson. He doesn't see contract workers, she said. Her eyes said she knew the world had changed, and Rahul could talk to whoever he wanted, regardless of what she said. Please, Annie, said Ralph, refusing to take advantage. It would mean a great deal to us. He'll want to hear what we have to say. What do you have to say? Interrupted Rahul. It can wait, said Ralph. Annie ummed and ahed, but eventually put Rahul in charge of all his other selves and left them to it. She might be your boss, said Ralph, but you could treat her with more kindness. Her husband, Jackson, has stomach cancer in every world we've come from. She hides it well, but we've met her a lot of times by this point. How? We didn't fall out of a tree. Every single one of us has worked for Annie. You've come through one another's worlds. 100 of them nodded all at once. Why? He asked, suddenly frightened. He was a homebody. He knew none of these copies of himself would have upped sticks and moved if there was any way to avoid it. What's happened to Mum? Ralph frowned, looking down at the floor, and Rahul's stomach lurched. I'm sorry, Rahul. Not a single one of the other Rahuls looked upbeat. Rahul wanted to ring home. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and fingered his mother's number on the screen. Aren't you at work? Asked his mother as her greeting. His heart slowed down enough for him to speak. Is everything okay? Yes, of course it is. Why? What's going on? Nothing, just wanted to catch up. Missing you. The other Rahuls were staring at him and he didn't want them to talk to his mother. He knew it was selfish, but she was his mother, not theirs. He said goodbye and hung up as quickly as he could manage. He'd undoubtedly face questions about his behaviour next time he was home. Why are you here? He asked Ralph. Inside, he was feeling like a split log. We've broken it. What? Everything, said Ralph. Not us. We didn't invent this thing. But we're all in trouble. Rahul, said a voice which didn't sound like his own. Rahul turned and found Johnson stood at the entrance to the floor, lift doors closing just behind him. He wondered how long his boss's boss's boss had been stood there. Rahul nodded his head in deference. Mr. Johnson, he began, but Ralph strode past him and straight at Johnson, whose eyes opened wide in terror. Larry, nice to meet you. You're wondering how it is the car park's full of people who look exactly like Rahul. Not that you know who Rahul is. He's one of your off-world retrieval contractors. Ralph reached Larry Johnson, arm outstretched, and the dazed-looking executive shook his hand right back. We need to speak to Kenneth Monsheen and James Tien. I know they're in town today. I can't, started Johnson, although he was looking over Ralph's shoulder at the hundreds of identical people in his car park. Sure you can. We won't all come up, just me and Rahul over there. He pointed at at Rahul. You can call me Ralph. What we know changes everything, and you guys want to be out in front of this. Johnson's eyes refocused, and he called the lift as, on the other side of the car park, more Rahuls arrived. Rahul had only seen the boardroom from the other side of video conferencing town halls, where the CEO, James Tien, would spend hours monologuing at his employees. In person, it was smaller than expected, although the central oval of a table was still huge. Large enough to seat 30 people, and, he mused, probably worth more than his annual salary. Tien and the CFO, Monsheen, were waiting for them when they arrived. They looked at Rahul and then at Ralph. You're twins, said Tien. No, said Ralph. Bring up the security feeds of the car park. How do you know we had security feeds? Asked Monsheen, but Tien was already waving at a one-way mirror. Monsheen, seeing what Tien was doing, moved to the side of the table from the position at the head where he was currently occupying. A screen dropped down from the ceiling where he'd been stood, and on it was the car park. Rahul could see hundreds of people milling around, although, on the whole, they were waiting patiently rather than mucking about. Which doesn't sound like me, he thought. These are Rahul coolies, nearly 400 of them, plus us, of course, said Ralph, and Rahul wondered where he'd gotten so confident. We're here because the world is ending and we need your help. At this, Tien heaved a deep sigh. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure what you think we can do. We're just a reclamation and archaeology company. And that's a claim we've heard nearly 400 times. It took us about 130 attempts before we worked out what would get you to help us and, ultimately, yourselves. Monsheen had folded his arms with the kind of look that suggested security would feature in their near future. Here's why you're going to help us, continued Ralph. I only need a minute of your time and then you can have Rahul fired and the rest of us will go on our merry way. Rahul didn't give them a chance to interrupt. We're going to give you the keys to room temperature superconductivity as well as cold fusion. In exchange, you're going to close down all portals to neighbouring Earths. Tien laughed and Monsheen scowled. Perfect corporate overlord behaviour right there, thought Rahul. And it's pretty fucking urgent. About 7 days behind us is a collapsing wavefront of superstates. If it reaches here, your world ends. Folded up into the single greatest probability world. We reckon you want to keep on living, so here we are. For many of us, it's too late. Our worlds are gone. But it's not too late for everyone. The wave propagates through time, fortunately, so we can get ahead of it. Now, you're not going to want to hear this, but Tien, I know you know the president pretty well, and your uncle is friends with the top tier of the Chinese CPP. He turned to Rahul. That's the Communist Party Politburo to you. Why should we believe you? Asked Tien. You're not taking this seriously, said Monsheen. Tien ignored him. You're smart enough to have realised all those people in the car park are also me. We're identical. There are an infinite number of worlds where we're all identical. It may be a smaller infinity than the Earth's where we're different, but you know by now how to access the different varieties. The time you spent avoiding universes where the Earth doesn't even exist taught you how to ride the superstate's probability amplitude. We were all sorry you lost your brother in the accident, but you know none of this would be possible without his loss. How do you know this? Asked Monsheen. We're from worlds identical to this one. That's not possible, said Rahul. Tien shot him an irritated look. Of course it is, said Ralph. Infinity is a bonkers thing. Basically, there are definitely an infinity of other Earths out there, and within that infinity are an infinity of worlds effectively identical to this one. So they are different. Of course they are. There's one atom different somewhere in a distant galaxy, or a virtual quark that didn't arise in the vacuum for some reason. It hardly matters. Functionally, they're all identical to this one we're stood in now. The real problem is that in connecting them all directly, we've basically collapsed the wavefront, holding them together in harmony. Why are we still here then? Said Monsheen. James, you're following us, aren't you? Tien nodded his understanding. Right, can we get this show on the road? Because, Ralph pointed at the ceiling. As he did so, the room shook and the thunder of stressed bricks and steel rumbled through the boardroom. That's a sign of things to come. Show me the tech, said Tien. You'll do it then? Asked Ralph. Yes, said Tien. How the hell do you know he'll keep his word? Shouted Rahul. He's stripped back our healthcare so much I'd move back to Britain if I could afford it. He's the one who took our insurance on his employees, so he gets paid if we die. Chill. It's how I know he'll keep his word. He's not stupid. He's greedy. Hey, said Tien. Oh, please, you've been called worse. Ralph put his hands on his hips. You could object and I'll take my lot and leave you to it. You can die knowing you could have been rich instead. Well, richer. Rahul couldn't believe what he was hearing. Tien was a bastard. A profiteering bastard, no less, who, if he'd worked in pharma, would have jacked up the cost of his drugs by 1,000% simply because he could. Now this copy of himself was stood in the room trusting him. It was too much. No, he said, into the space where Ralph and Tien were reaching an agreement. I know, said Ralph, it sticks in the throat, letting this grimy, shitty capitalist who thinks he got here by his own graft profit yet again from the work of others. But Rahul, trust me. Trust yourself. This is the right thing to do. Tien and Monsheen watched their exchange in silence. Finally, said Ralph, when Rahul didn't respond. You lot are going to feed us all while you make your calls. We want burgers from T-Bone. Get us new clothes and let us use your showers. Some of us need basic medicines and painkillers. Not a huge drain, but enough to show your goodwill because, by the way, we're not staying to throw shade on your sudden discovery of technological wonders. The food was better than Rahul normally managed when he was in the office. In spite of himself, he was impressed with how quickly they'd managed to feed all the new Rahuls with deliveries from his favourite restaurant. There were only 10 showers on site, and that took much longer to work through, but by the end of the day, nearly everyone who wanted one had showered. Rahul tried to be useful, guiding others of himself to the showers and back, showing people where the changing rooms were, and dealing with the trickle of people turning up with food, towels and soap. The dining room was a hastily converted series of conference rooms on the 4th floor. The windows showed out over beautiful landscape grounds, and the sun was shining on the large, curved lake which snaked around two sides of the complex. Rahul had finished showing people where the showers were by giving those who were first out the job of looking after those who came later. Stood by the window, avoiding talking to the many versions of himself, he wondered what came next. Rahul, said a voice by his side. He couldn't tell which version of himself had come alongside. I don't want to talk, he said. I know, said his copy. Quite a few of us have stood here in the last few weeks, looking out on the lake, wondering what we're supposed to do. Rahul didn't answer. A lot of us still don't quite know how to accept we're just one of many. It's not like we're actually variations either. We're all the same. We've had games of compare the memory, finish the embarrassing story, moan about our families, and they're all the same? Not similar, but identical. I know when you lost that tooth in the fight at school but lied about it to Momo. I know when I lost my virginity and how it was the most awkward thing you'd ever done. And how the two of us spent more time talking about what pizza to order afterwards. By the way, you should have gone with his choice. Pineapple does not belong on pizza. I've told myself that 100 times since, said Rahul. Haven't we all? What happens now? You come with us? Rahul had known this request was coming. He knew he was going to say yes, but wasn't ready to say the words straight away. There'll be no coming back, right? No, if we're in time, there's a world you can't return to. But if we're not, well, you won't be here when greed destroys them rather than saves them. What about Galen? At worst, it's a week without you. But he can't come? You really want 300 identical Rahuls lusting over your, lost boyfriend? The thought made him want to puke. You really think greed can save us? The other Rahul shrugged. No idea. We don't go back. We haven't even tested if the portals continue to operate. It's on them. We're pretty clear about the consequences. The ground shook again, gently, as if turning over in its sleep. Rahul shifted his feet to accommodate the movement. Will this get worse? Only until the universe collapses, said the other. We don't know how bad it gets at the end. I guess not, said Rahul. How many times have you done this? Me, 13. I'm quite the newcomer. Some of the longest serving, and here he actually pointed across the room at a couple of Rahuls sat on their own. This is their 200th world. They're the ones who saw through how to convince your CEO to do what we asked. I was wondering, said Rahul. You all seem so much more confident than I'd be. We're not, was the reply. We failed hundreds of times. For the first few hundred, we didn't get out of the car park. I'm sad to say, many Rahuls died before we got the numbers just right. Too few of us, and they tend to either shove us back through the portal or arrest us, and then the world ends. How did you figure it out? We didn't, not really. Accidentally, the number of Rahuls here are enough that no one thinks of manhandling us, but not so many they get all scared and call the police. Instead, we've had the pleasure of working out what levers Tien and Monshi needed pulled to cooperate. I'm surprised by Monshi, said Rahul. Oh, the man's an arsehole. Not in one of my 13 trips has he helped. It's always Tien, and only because we give him technology scavenged from versions of Earth no one else has been to. When do we go? Asked Rahul. A small oblong was placed into his hand. When you've given them this. After that, we're gone, and on to the next Earth. Rahul felt butterflies in his stomach. How many times does it need to be done before we've saved the world? A hand grabbed him by the bicep and pulled him over to the two long-serving members of the team. How many worlds do we need to save? The two stared at Rahul and laughed. The type of laugh Rahul remembered being told off for in class when he was young. Uncontrollable and irrepressible. He realised he'd asked a stupid question, but no amount of racking his brain brought the answer into focus. There's no stopping, said one of them. There are an infinite number of Earths like this one. We'll be jumping until there's no juice left in our limbs. Even then we don't know if it was enough to stop the collapse we began. That's not quite true, said the newer Rahul. We're one of about 50 million groups travelling across all the possible worlds, not just Rahuls, but your friend Teddy, even poor old Supervisor Annie. There are countless others. Our job is to get supplies for ourselves and then travel on to the next world. Those who want to stay behind are welcome. We hope each world we reach will be saved, even if only for a time. So there's no harm in it. In fact, we think there's a number of us gathered together which is too large to succeed. So losing a few here and there as more of us join is no bad thing. Rahul thought it over. We won't ever succeed in reaching them all then. The others didn't reply. He guessed they knew what he was thinking. You know, the first time I stepped to a new Earth, I thought it would be shattering, he said. Instead, it felt like something was missing. I'd hoped for a world just a shade different to this one. Maybe with blue magpies or purple squirrels, or a version of me who'd become a movie star. He remembered closing his eyes the first time he'd stepped through the portal, too scared to look at what was happening. He'd landed and fallen straight on his face. The others waited quietly. They knew, didn't they? They knew you were out there, hundreds, millions of us, all the same. Ours knew, so yours knew as well. Rahul wondered what difference it would have made to know there were an uncountable number of him, all the same, all with the same memories, the same failures, the same embarrassments. Do you talk to each other about? The other Rahul shook his head. Sometimes. I found that what's in the past is better left there. He smiled, especially when the only people you can talk to lived it as well. You want to stay, said Rahul. The other version looked a little sheepish. Is that okay? There are a couple of us who've had enough jumping. We all get there in the end. The life of a refugee is a tiring one. Rahul thought about it, about the life he was leading the others, which the others would take over. What will you do? I'm not sure the CEO is going to love us for what we've done. It doesn't matter, said the other. It does, insisted Rahul. The other shook his head firmly. You haven't done it yet. You haven't left everything behind to be destroyed and arrived again a dozen times only to find nothing different and someone else in your place. I can't even hate you. The other Rahul pulled at his fingers as if he were limbering up to play the piano. Eventually you'll take whatever comes your way, no matter how impermanent it might be. You'll get Galen too, Rahul said. The other Rahul smiled wolfishly. He wondered how long it had been since he'd seen any version of Galen. How long it had been since he'd held him, kissed him. How long since they'd fucked. Sighing, Rahul nodded. Their parents had arrived as immigrants, and despite building new lives, had 100 little habits which spoke of insecurities they simply couldn't move on from. The need to take sachets of salt and pepper from restaurants. The need to have money stashed around the house in jars and shoeboxes. How they never, ever wasted food. His mother would never let anyone leave the table without offering them seconds, and he would tease her about it, about her need to make people fat. At least that was how he'd always seen it. Now, staring at the other Rahuls, he thought that maybe she'd just been scared so badly she wanted people to have enough food from her in case they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Her way of rebalancing the universe. "Do you regret leaving home?" he asked. "No," said all three of them around the table. There was a certainty to their answers which felt like foundations under his feet. Another Rahul bounced up to them. "It's time to go. You've got the tech for Tien." Rahul opened his hand and showed the hard drive. Tien was waiting by the portal. Rahul walked up to him. He wondered where Ralph had gone. "This is it?" asked Tien. Rahul nodded. "A couple of us are going to stay." "You can trust my word," said Tien sharply. "It's not about you," said Rahul. "We simply want to stay. Make sure they're comfortable, please." Tien nodded. One of the Rahuls had been working at the controls of the portal. He threw 2 thumbs up in their direction. "We're good to go," said Rahul, even as, behind him, the others started walking through. Rahul waited until they were all gone. He wanted to be the last. The pair who'd elected to stay behind moved away, standing near to one another, but aside from Tien, Annie, and the other workers who'd ended up helping them. Rahul waved at himself. They waved back, subdued, grateful. With a quick turn, he walked through the portal and was gone.